New digital technologies are driving a step change in enterprise business transformation. At the Digital Twin Podcast, we explore the intersection of technology and business. What should your digital twin look like? Hello and welcome back to Digital Twin Podcast. Today we want to hit on a topic that's getting a lot of news and attention. In fact, there's been some recent news about Microsoft Azure Edge and some of the acquisitions they've made. And I believe they call it Azure Edge Zone. It's an interesting sort of approach to their business model. Of course, it's also a sign that one of the bigger players is moving into the space with a lot of power and force. So I thought it would be an interesting topic for us to talk about. Why is Edge important? What makes it critical to a business and operation and infrastructure? Maybe talk about some of the challenges that an Edge infrastructure would face.
Yeah, I think it's a good point. I think most companies that are going through some transformation, if haven't, should be thinking about an edge strategy because it is a key component as we start moving forward in understanding data and wherever there's data gaps. This is where some of these edge devices, whether we're looking at whether you're processing data or whether you're trying to get more data with more sensors. This is an area where we see a lot of development and a lot of growth for sure. With that, as we start looking at when we think about an edge device or the environment around the edge, there are really kind of a few different things that people look at. I think one way to look at it, especially from an analytics point of view or from a data point of view, is the data time sensitive, right? Are you collecting a lot of data that needs to be computated or run some analysis on it pretty quickly to create an output or an action, right? So that's one area where really people start to focus on that strategy is do you have areas that need quick action or quick analysis? Yeah. If that's the case, then you kind of have to start analyzing a lot of things around where that data is being computated and what's reasonable and the volume and velocity that you're sending up to, let's say, your cloud infrastructure where you might have more sophisticated systems and analytical tools to be running this data, right? So you have to think about that strategy. And I think, looking back, it's a mix of that. It's a mix of where you want those computations at, where is it important within your organization, and also what is not time sensitive that can be brought into an environment that can run a little bit more sophisticated analytics on that front, right? So yeah, I think it's if we start thinking about the edge, it's got to be a little bit more of the simpler applications that are isolated and can be kind of controlled in a nice clean box or an environment or a boundary is a really good strategy if you have those identified. And every organization's a little bit different, and you'll find those little areas as you start moving throughout your strategy and what's available. You already have some edge devices. You might not even realize it, but you already might have some edge strategy that's already in place today. So
just about every company, I think, always had edge, right? You can't survive without edge. Today, what is changing with the digital transformation and the importance of cloud? What's the role of the edge, right? Traditionally, whether you are a retail company or a bank or a content delivery company like a Comcast or an AT&T that's delivering media, there has always been edge, and that edge has gone up in importance, right? And I would say most often the CDN, the content delivery network, was the most important piece because you had to cache media in order to serve that, quickly and efficiently without having to move a lot of data around, right? But then that's not the only use case. Now we're starting to see a lot more with I would say latency sensitive applications, which you mentioned. But the other key aspect of it is bandwidth. How much data do you actually want to send to the cloud, right? If there is enough of computational capacity at the edge, analytic capacity at the edge, how much of that can be done at the edge? And I don't think every edge deserves that sort of computational capacity because there's risk involved. But I think what you and I are talking about today is how's the edge really changing? What sort of use cases might be gaining sort of momentum with the new edge play, and where do you see that? Right? What are some of the examples? I mean, I think that's probably what would be of interest to our audience.
Yeah, so I think definitely you see a lot of different applications where the edge can be a key component. Typically, when you're looking in industries or areas that have a lot of remote type of needs, where you don't have a lot of communication to these devices that are doing some type of either calculation, control, optimizing.
Yeah.
You may need to start looking at how you can handle a lot of that more locally than trying to bring data up into an environment where you have a risk of not bringing data through very challenging communication, right?
Yep.
So, I'm not saying that's the only areas, but there's other areas too where, a lot of some of these applications, even within our phones, if you start, searching or going through Google or doing some voice recognition on different marketing applications, a lot of these algorithms are almost somewhat being run in the applications within your own device that
Yep.
people don't realize, and not being run back at a headquarters and then
Mm-hmm.
come back and giving you generated ideas around what you're looking at and how your feeds should be kind of coming in. So that gives you an idea how, the way the edge is kind of looking at
Yeah.
data, it's self-analyzing and creating the actions across that space. So remote areas, a lot of heavily dense populations around cities. So you'll start hearing smart cities and how they're using video technologies, into
Self-driving cars.
self-driving cars to, traffic, analytics to help, make the congestion within cities a little bit better, safer.
Yeah.
And also, within buildings, you start seeing a lot of building technologies around, heating specific zones and shutting things off,
Yeah.
energy efficiency type of optimization tools. You see it today in the common thermostats that are being sold with Nest and the other players
Yeah.
out there as well that are doing this at that device, right?
Mm-hmm.
You're not running the analytics in a
Yep.
cloud environment. They're being done right in the local area, right where you have your,
Yeah.
you set your temperature settings. So it's a fascinating realm. It's a tool within the digital transformation realm that should be looked at from an overall strategy point of view, right? It can be
Mm-hmm.
a unique tool. So
I
in
think
that sense,
from the analytics side of it, I believe what we're starting to see quite a bit is how AI and machine learning is shifting a lot of that analytics to the edge, because some of that decision making insights could be generated right at the edge, as opposed to having all the data being sent to the cloud and have that decision or insight made out in the cloud that generates. And some of the applications could be latency sensitive, which means that back and forth may not be a good idea, right?
yeah.
And as we see the edge gaining more computational ability, what we're going to see is that AI presence going much higher and being able to do a lot more at the edge. But of course, that brings significant amount of challenges. As always been, edge is a potential security risk, not just from a physical perspective, but also from a cyber perspective. And cyber officially has become a significant risk even in the enterprise, regardless of the physical barriers that we put up, right? So that's if we start to look at the benefits and the risk, I mean, definitely benefits outweigh the risk, but we do want to talk a little bit about some of the challenges that are associated with the edge and the growth of edge.
Yeah, I think that's an important aspect because I think, there schools of thought on how the edge can be utilized, right? There's the approach of the autonomous control, or the edge that's actually doing the computation and controlling action around a lot of different things. It could be some things that are critically vital, or some things
Mhm.
that could be, somewhat optimization purposes for different types of applications. I'll give you one example of the lane assist in your car, right? It's running computations. If you turn
Mhm.
on the lane assist, it's using data from the sensors around your car to see if
Yeah.
you're within the lines or within the lane. And if you're not, it starts to adjust and bring you back into the lane, whether it's an automated response to the driver to make that action themselves,
Mhm.
or in some cases, in some of the more sophisticated models, it actually brings the car back and keeps it in the lane.
Yeah.
So that's a type of action that is being, utilized at the edge that can have the latency
Yeah.
issues going up into an environment to make that quick acting decision.
And the
Because
traffic
these are,
management systems that respond to intelligent cars and traffic recognition systems, right? They're
yeah.
also responding quickly to real time traffic. And
Hmm.
they're also edge devices and computational systems that cannot afford to have latency involved. So there's definitely a number of applications in both industrial space as well as smart city and other areas that definitely raise the profile of the edge.
Yeah, I think it's definitely a component that needs to be looked at very carefully, especially when you're talking about control or automated control or autonomous
Yeah.
control, because back to your point about cybersecurity, once you have that feedback of being able to control very sophisticated pieces of equipment or assets,
Yeah.
you open up the envelope for as you were mentioning, the writing back into this, into adjusting algorithms and
Yeah.
analytics that are being computed at the edge. That's a vulnerability,
Mhm.
right?
And the other
So
part of it is, you recognize that cloud has brought in a lot of efficiency by being able to provide cheap storage, cheap computation, all of that, other benefits of the cloud. But cloud isn't necessarily inexpensive. So if you start to look at, cost of storage, whether it's hot storage or storage, you start to realize that it does get expensive as you start to store data in a large magnitude, right? And
yeah,
so you do have to make a decision, depending on the application that you're running, whether or not it is wise to pump all the data up because you're consuming both bandwidth and data, and so at some point there's a cost benefit evaluation that needs to be made. What sort of analytics can you make at the edge, and can you rely on that analytics or the insights and use that in the cloud as opposed to having to do all of that work out in the cloud. And it definitely changes from application to application, right?
I think that's a very important point, because I think that's one of the components that gets lost when you start building the business case around your transformation journey, is the velocity of data that you're bringing in to the value that's coming out of the analytics
Yep.
that are going to drive that. Are you going to stay ahead of that cost curve to give you enough of that
Yep.
value? And I think it's a very key component, and I think that gets lost because a lot of these projects don't really analyze that from the get-go. It's
Right.
almost kind of let's explore and figure this out
Yeah.
before we really think about what does this really mean to the business,
Yeah.
and what data is really needed at what frequency and how much,
Yeah.
to be able to deliver this value. So, and some of that, like, that's why an edge strategy is important. It can cut some of those costs where you find fit.
Yeah.
So I
And
think it's
yeah, and we also, have to recognize there is significant risk associated with edge, right? You do need physical real estate. It's not out in this cloud, right? It needs a it needs a space, and it needs to sit somewhere. It needs to be physically secure, and it does need power and cooling. It needs redundancy, and if you're talking about thousands of points, thousands of edge locations. Now, immediately you're talking racking up costs, right? And
Yeah,
not
where you
not
have to maintain that
that's
hardware,
what I
you
was
have to
gonna say.
maintain the sensors. I mean,
Yeah,
that adds another component to it.
yeah.
And yeah,
When you have
but
a data
it's
center, you're centrally managing a lot of that stuff, right? But
yeah.
when you're out, you're a midstream company, or whether you're a bank with 1,000, 2,000 branches, now you're talking about a highly critical edge infrastructure that needs to be managed on a daily basis, and you need to have your eyes and ears, not only to make sure that they're up and running, but they're secure, right?
hmm And a lot of that too is when you think about the edge is doing most of it, obviously the backup to some of these edge devices of doing everything needs to be brought into somewhat of a backup or a fallback strategy into your overall centralized database so that you can at least have some minimal um, protocols on how you handle the devices if they, get out of range, or if you need to kind of control them from remote, you're able to be able to handle some of these strategies. Like you mentioned, if one goes down, what do you do, right? What's
Yeah.
that strategy? Can you still communicate? And what happens,
Yeah,
right?
and
So
remote access, right? Are you
yeah,
able to
absolutely.
get to the device and fix it with remote SMEs?
Yeah,
And if you can't get to it, how long is it going to take for you to fix it? If you roll a truck out there, it's downtime, right? And
yeah.
whatever that edge device was doing, or edge devices were doing, is not doing it, and there's
Yeah.
a cost to that, right?
And one of the components that gets lost here is that some people don't think about is the edge is doing a lot of the analytics, and it's driving the actions
Hmm.
to the localized environment. There is a way to think about how the actions are trending. This is what I mean. The data that you want to bring from these devices doesn't necessarily mean you need to bring all that volume of data.
Yeah,
Just the things that are changing so you
right.
can start trending the change
It's a great point.
by the analytics that are being run
Yep.
so that you can run higher level analytics on a lower localized analytical level
Yep.
to maybe change different set points,
Yeah.
conditions that you see fit. I mean, so this is a first level or first layer of
Yeah.
analytics that you're evaluating. So I think it's a strategy that needs to be looked at as well so that you can one have a better idea what's happening and not be blind on just having the edge do everything.
Yeah,
Right.
and I
So
think we also want to make it clear that we're not putting a clear definition to what edge is, right? And
yeah,
edge could be your phone, as you mentioned. It's
yeah,
it's a computational device that's a payment gateway and capable of a lot of different things. A bank branch is edge, and you may have a few servers and a few networking devices at that branch. A Best Buy store has an edge infrastructure. So does a refinery and a storage
manufacturing
terminal.
plant,
Yeah,
yes,
a plan,
terminals, yeah,
and a content delivery network, a Comcast or an AT&T may have a fairly large data center that they might define as an edge. So edge isn't necessarily you know crystal clear from a definition of what it encompasses, how many servers or how big or how small, and what it does. The truth of the matter is, it is defined by the functionality or function, right? I think you kind of defined that in the beginning about, how that provides an entry point to your rest of the infrastructure,
correct.
and that could be many levels, right? It could
Yeah,
be many sizes and in many shapes.
hmm
But
yeah,
it was good for us to have this conversation.
yeah. I think there's going to be a lot of development on this, and soon we'll have some spotlights on some of the technologies that are available in this realm because it is part of a
Mhm.
strategy that needs to be looked at from your overall point of
There's some very
strategy.
interesting
So
technologies and players in the space, and we talked about bringing some of those folks on board and maybe have a conversation here on the podcast. That'd be exciting.
absolutely, that would be. Well, that concludes our segment for today on Edge. Feel free to comment and give any recommendations on other topics that you guys might be interested. But stay tuned for our future podcast topics that are coming out, and our interview lineup should be coming out within the next 2 or 3 weeks. We have a few lined up that we might
Yep.
start showcasing here with you guys, so that you guys can be informed on what's happening.
So
And
subscribe. That's
so
important.
subscribe, yeah, absolutely, and stay safe. Stay safe out there, everybody. And this is the Digital Twin Podcast signing off.